Hey students, it's Mrs. Poe. Today we will be reading Mr. Maxwell's Mouse by Frank Ash and Devin Ash. Today, as usual, Mr. Howard Maxwell entered the Paw and Claw restaurant and was greeted by the head waiter Clyde. "Good afternoon, sir," said Clyde with a gracious bow. "Good afternoon indeed," replied Mr. Maxwell. "It isn't every day one is promoted to Vice Manager of Efficiency and Control at Taylor, Bentwell, and Nipson." "Congratulations, sir," said Clyde, and he led Mr. Maxwell to his table. Mr. Maxwell was the most popular regular at the Paw and Claw. 5 days a week, rain or shine, he arrived at precisely 12:45 at the same table near the potted spider plant and ordered baked mouse for lunch. But today he asked for a menu. "I will have a mixed green salad for an appetizer," he announced, tapping his well-manicured claws on the arm of his chair, "and a raw mouse for my entree." "Excellent choice, sir. Would you like us to kill it for you?" asked Clyde. "That won't be necessary," said Mr. Maxwell, noticing that Spider Plant needed to be watered. "Just make sure it's fresh and healthy." "All of our mice are fresh and healthy," asserted Clyde, "and bred for plumpness and politeness as well." "I'm sure they are," said Mr. Maxwell, and he closed his menu with a flourish. While Mr. Maxwell ate his appetizer, he gloated over his promotion. "I wonder if my new office will have a picture window," he mused. "And it would be nice if there was a sofa where clients could sit and wait for me to notice them." Clyde arrived with the main course just as Mr. Maxwell finished his salad. "Your entree, sir," said Clyde. "Perfect timing," purred Mr. Maxwell. "I wish some of our employees at Taylor, Bentwell, and Nipson were half as efficient as you." Clyde lifted the cover. Mr. Maxwell's entree was stretched out on a single slice of rye toast, as if sunning itself on a sandy beach. "Good afternoon, sir," said the mouse. Mr. Maxwell's mouth began to water. "Good afternoon, indeed," he thought. "Aren't you going to add a little salt?" squeaked the mouse, as Mr. Maxwell picked up his knife and fork. Not having treated himself to a live mouse for a long time, Mr. Maxwell had grown unaccustomed to speaking to his meals. "Ah, yes, thank you," he replied. Soon the mouse felt fine crystals of salt pelting his fur and bouncing off his nose. "Achoo!" Looking up, he saw that Mr. Maxwell was showering with pepper as well as salt. "Achoo! Achoo! Achoo!" the mouse sneezed until his nose was free of all the pepper. "Gesundheit?" said Mr. Maxwell. "Thank you," replied the mouse. "It's very comforting to know that I'm serving such a courteous customer." Mr. Maxwell appreciated the compliment, but said nothing more. His mother had always advised him not to fraternize with the food. Again, Mr. Maxwell picked up his knife and fork. "If I might be so bold," said the mouse, as Mr. Maxwell was about to slice into the flesh, "may I ask for one small favor?" "That depends," said Mr. Maxwell, as he pressed the fork more firmly into the mouse's fur. "I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind saying a little prayer before you begin," explained the mouse. "At home we always said a blessing before meals." "Sorry, but I'm not religious," replied Mr. Maxwell. "Oh, pardon me," said the mouse. "I hope you don't mind that I asked." "Not at all," said Mr. Maxwell. "Will there be anything else?" "Well, actually there is," replied the mouse, and he looked over at the rim of the plate and the empty glass. "I always thought that when it was my turn to go, to be eaten, I I would be enjoyed by a fine glass of lemonade. Sorry to disappoint you, said Mr. Maxwell, though I did receive a promotion today, more than just cause for celebration. Mr. Maxwell instantly regretted telling the mouse about his promotion. Congratulations on your good fortune, sir, said the mouse. I'm sure you'll do exceedingly well in your new position. Perhaps someday you'll even become president of your own corporation. Well, if I were you, I wouldn't be so concerned with all that right now, said Mr. Maxwell. And to himself he thought, what a wordy mouse. I hope he doesn't give me indigestion. Quite so, responded the mouse. Say, would you mind if I said a blessing for myself? Mr. Maxwell was tempted to end the conversation with a quick thrust, but he eased back on his knife. A prayer would be acceptable, but make it short. I only have an hour and a half for lunch. It would be a very short prayer, said the mouse, gently pushing aside the fork. Would you mind if I kneel? You can stand on your head for all I care, hissed Mr. Maxwell. I just hope you're not entertaining any thoughts of escapes. This restaurant is full of cats. Even if you were shot from a cannon, you wouldn't make it halfway to the door. Apparently, you've never had such a meal as well-bred as myself, the mouse bristled. Allow me to assure you, sir, I have no desire to escape my fate. As the mouse knelt beside the cold slice of rye toast, Mr. Maxwell was reminded of a small kitten saying its bedtime prayers. Dear Lord, began the mouse, thank you very much for my wholesome upbringing. I have had a great honor of feeding this fine gentleman. Thank you for the wonderful friends I've made, waiting in the pantry for my turn to serve catkind. Please bless Melissa and Pearl and Vera and Wilbur, and especially Tiny Albert, who wishes you would put some weight on him soon, so he does not have to wait so long for his turn. I will miss them all, and I please bless my dear mother and father, and my many brothers and sisters, wherever they may be, dead or alive. They are all so good to me. And suddenly the mouse choked up a tiny tear, and it appeared at the corner of his eye. As if embarrassed to show any emotion, he abruptly ended his prayer with a quick, "Ah, mice." Slowly and with great dignity, the mouse climbed back onto the toast and announced that he was ready. Just then, Clyde stepped over and asked, "Is everything all right, sir?" "Yes, Clyde, everything's fine," replied Mr. Maxwell. "But perhaps I will have a glass of lemonade with this mouse after all." "Why, of course," said Clyde. "I'll have our lemonade list right here. I've heard that this year's lemonade is exceptional, but shamefully overpriced," offered the mouse. "So I suggest one of the raspberry lemonades. Anything between the year 78, 85, but not 83. That year produced very bitter lemon crop. Unless you prefer pink lemonade," said With Mouse, "then I would suggest that a pink lemonade would do." "That would be my exact recommendation," said Clyde. "Did I ever tell you that our mice are the very best?" "Impressive," said Mr. Maxwell. Mr. Maxwell sighed and looked down at his mouse in silence for a few moments. "I know what you're thinking," said the mouse. "Is that so?" said Mr. Maxwell. "You're wondering if I should have chosen a pink lemonade instead," said the mouse. "Actually, I was wondering if I should ask the waiter to kill you for me," said Mr. Maxwell. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," said the mouse. "I can see how I've stepped over the line and become too personal with you. The chef warned me repeatedly against doing that. Instead of making your meal more pleasant, I've made it more difficult. Please forgive me. This isn't easy for me either, you know." "It's not your fault," said Mr. Maxwell, as he assured him. "It's just that I haven't had a live mouse in quite a while, and—" "Then you must ask the waiter to help you out," insisted the mouse. And at that moment Clyde returned with the lemonade. "Will there be anything else, sir?" he asked. "No, thank you, Clyde," said Mr. Maxwell. When Clyde was gone, the mouse said, "I understand. You don't want to appear squeamish. It wouldn't be catly. Quite the contrary. I have no concern for appearances in matters of this sort. I just thought you deserved to be dispatched by someone who, shall we say, knows you," said Mr. Maxwell, and he drank his lemonade in one gulp. "I have many live mice. When I was younger, dozens of them. But now I just can't seem to—" "I know. I should be quiet right now," whispered the mouse. "But may I suggest that you make a blindfold of your napkin? It will make it so much easier." Mr. Maxwell picked up his knife and fork and then set it down again. "No, I can't." "But you must," insisted the mouse. "You're a cat and I'm a mouse. Certain things cannot be changed. Please, try the blindfold." "Perhaps I'm just getting older," said Mr. Maxwell, and he tied his napkin tightly around his eyes. "My own death doesn't seem so far off as it used to." Mr. Maxwell's tail swished nervously back and forth. "You can do this," said the mouse, as he leaned over the edge of the table and gently grabbed hold of Mr. Maxwell's tail. "I know you can," he said. Mr. Maxwell's paws shook so much that his knife and fork began to rattle. "Just steady your knife," instructed the mouse, as he guided Mr. Maxwell's tail to the plate. "That's it. Now, when I count to 3, thrust with all your might." "Very well," said Mr. Maxwell. With a deep sigh, "I just want to say one thing. Thank you very much. You've been most patient with me." "No need to thank me," replied the mouse. "Just enjoy your meal. Ready? Here we go. 1, 2. "I'm sorry about this," said Mr. Maxwell. "Really I am. It's nothing personal, you know." "Likewise," said the mouse, and he called out, 3. Yow! Mr. Maxwell howled of pain. Was heard for 3 blocks away at Taylor, Bentwell, and Nipson. It was so powerful that the patrons near his table were knocked off their chairs. Clyde dropped a whole tray of boiled lobsters, and the chef spilled out a pot of hot oil, setting the kitchen on fire. In all the mayhem, no one noticed Mr. Maxwell's mouse raced to the pantry and freed all the other mice. It was utter mayhem. As mice scattered in every direction, an ambulance arrived to take Mr. Maxwell to the emergency room. Mr. Maxwell's mouse has never been recaptured. Rumors linking him to other daring mouse escapes have spread far and wide, but thus far no proof of a definite whereabouts have surfaced. But late one night, however, soon after the incident at the restaurant, a small handwritten note of lightly scented lavender paper was slipped under Mr. Maxwell's hot door. And that little note read, "Dear Sir, I just want you to know that I sincerely regret any distress I may have caused you. I am sure you would have taken similar measures had you found yourself in my position. Meanwhile, I trust that you and your tail are on well road to recovery. Of course, I bear you no ill and can only imagine that you feel the same. May you live a long and prosperous life. Sincerely, your friend from the Paw and Claw.